Good day, everyone. Today we'll be talking about a new topic, which is all about activity-based product costing. So let's start first with our learning objectives. So we have 5 objectives for today or in this video discussion. First is to discuss the importance of unit cost. Next is to describe the functional-based costing approaches. Tell why functional-based costing approaches may produce distorted cost. Fourth objective is to explain how an activity-based costing system works for product costing. And lastly is to explain how the number of activity rates can be reduced. So let's start with the first objective, which is to discuss the importance of unit cost. Now, before anything else, let us first define what unit cost is. Now, unit cost is the total cost associated with the units produced divided by your total number of units produced. Now, I assume you already know this one because this is also discussed in your cost accounting. Diba? So, this is just a recall. So, again, unit cost is your total cost divided by the number of units produced. So, basically, it refers to the product cost per unit, diba? So kung tagpila ang cost nga imuhang na-incur sa pag-produce og isa ka product, so mo na ang unit cost. Now, in the production of unit cost, or when we talk about unit cost, diba? Before we can get the unit costs, we need to know, of course, what is the total cost. Or ito pasabot ato yung numerator, which is total cost. Now, total cost in production refers to your direct materials, your direct labor, and your manufacturing overhead. So, meaning, kaning tulo ka components, mauni ang nag-comprise sa imuhang total cost or it comprises your production cost. So, also, this is just a recall. You already know what direct materials is. These are the raw materials that are applied to the production of the product. Same with your direct labor. So, katong mga people or the manpower involved in the production of your product. And of course, your manufacturing overhead, which consists of your indirect materials and indirect labor. So again, mo na composition sa imuhang total cost, diba? Excuse me. So again, these three costs are often referred to as well as your mga production cost. So, the production cost, or what do you call that? The product cost definition is used or is defined or is mandated rather by the external financial reporting. So, muna makabantay mo is napun ni siya sa inyuhang financial accounting, di ba? Napun yung mga direct materials and your overhead. And also, as I mentioned, your cost accounting. And then, since it plays a key role when you get the inventory cost or when you measure the inventory or when you value inventory, and then at the same time, once you get the inventory cost already, mo correlate na siya or diha na pa nimo makuha ang imong cost of goods sold and so on and so forth, and then it will boil down to or it can help you determine already your income. So daghan og gamit ang imong production cost, especially if you are a manufacturing na company or manufacturing imong specific nga industry. So therefore, an entity needs to know kung unsa ang ihang total cost or the composition of its total cost kay naa siya impact on the decision making of the company. So for example, if your organization or your company is iyahang goal is mahimo siyang cost leader sa industry nga kung asa siya, di ba? So meaning kung cost leader siya, maintain siya lower cost with high quality. So ikaw as part of the management is mag-think ka on what areas of the total cost imuhang pwede ka maka-lower down, di ba? Without compromising the quality of your products. So for example, baron ari ka sa imuhang direct materials, di ba? Mangita kag supplier nga ang iyahang ini palit nimo og materials kay mas gamay imuhang bayaran or nabaron kay bulk discounts, then same ra gyapon ang quality of material nga imuhang makuha. So meaning na minimize nimo imuhang cost and at the same time na-retain na nimo ang quality sa imong product. So, di ba, lower cost, by lower cost, meaning mas gamay po ang imong possible na ma-offer sa imong mga consumers. So, more likely nga imong consumers is anha mo palit sa imong kay tungod again, di ba, mas gamay imong cost. That is when you become a cost leader in your industry. So, ina na siya, dapat kabaw ka sa mga components nga ma-affect sa imong cost in order for you as part of the management to learn how to make decisions or mo-affect siya sa imong decision making. Same would apply if you are to join mga biddings, di ba? If ka na naka sa government, kasagaran sa mga government projects, or mag-start man siya with biddings, di ba? So, ang mga companies is hatag sila sa ilhang mga estimated bid prices. And then, unsa may mga factors nga mo-affect sa decision sa company, or not sa company, but rather sa government, kung kinsa nga contractor ang ilhang kuhaon. So, di ba, ari jud mo tan-aw ang government sa pila ang cost nga ma-incur ani niya kung kani nga company ang kuhaon. Kung si company A, for example, buta 10 million, si company B, 12 million, and so on and so forth. So, si kada company sa pagbuhat anak nila sa ilahang proposal is naka-itemize na dito, di ba, kung unsa nga mga cost ang pwede ma-incur ni government, asa mapunta, and so on and so forth. So, mao nang important jud kaayo, di ba, nga kaybaw kaunsaon pag-compute sa imuhang cost. Now, let's move on. Now, how do we measure the cost to be assigned? Nakabaw ta nga importante ang cost, no? Na unsa man to pagkaybaw kung pila ang cost, or how do we measure the cost? Now, production costs we assign maybe actual costs or estimated costs. Now, actual cost, of course, kung pila yung na-incur, mo na yung actual cost. So, for example, pila cost sa imong raw materials kag ipalit karon, di ba? That is your actual nga direct materials cost. Then, estimated is ari na siya mo come in sa imong overhead. So, karon na siyang i-discuss in detail later. Now, how do we assign cost to a product? So, the process of associating cost, once you already measured it, or the process of associating cost with the units, with the units produced, once you've already measured it, is called cost assignment. So, this is already mentioned sa, I think it was chapter 2, katong sa mga management concepts, basic management concepts, diba? Na dito ang cost assignment. Now, there is masgi specific na lang yun siya. So, you have, or your production cost may be assigned either through functional based na costing, or second is either through activity based na costing. So, we will be defining each kind of method later on in detail. Now, as I mentioned, di ba, muna siyang importance sa imuhang unit cost, no? So, again, unit cost affects bids submitted for special products. It affects the development and introduction of new products because, of course, di ba, if you are to create a new product, balik from scratch baya ka ana. So good from scratch baya ka. So you will think of katong mga appropriate nga mga raw materials nga gamiton for your new product, diba? Unsa man imong hunahunahon, ari ba ka sa low quality and low cost na mga raw materials, or ari ba ka sa high quality, high cost na raw materials, or if possible, pwede ba low cost, high quality nga raw materials, diba? So those are factors that affect a production of a new product. Now, when it comes to direct labor, pila ka buok manpower imong kailangan since bago pa ka nag-start, diba? Do you need 10 people, 20 people, pila ka supervisor, or do you need machineries, pila ka machinery imong gamiton, diba? So, those are factors that affect, or those costs, diba, are in relation to you creating a new product, which would then translate to unit cost, di ba? Maadto ra gyapon na siya sa unit cost nimo kay, of course, they are part of your total cost. Then again, also unit cost affects decisions to make or buy a product or service, accept or reject a special order, keep or drop a product or service. So these decisions are it falls under your short-term non-routine decision makings, which is part of your MAS 2. So na siya ang topic, short-term non-routine decision makings. Na siya sa MAS 2. So kanina niya na in detail. So kanig hapon ang mabasis aninla is boil down gyapon sa unit cost. Is it more expensive to, or asa ka mas makasave kung ikaw ang magbuhat sa product or imuhang paliton ang product to an outside nga or a third party, diba? So ang unit cost man imuhang tanawan ni. Kung mupalit ka mo na ni mong total nga unit cost. Kung imuhang paliton ang product, diba? Ang kanang selling price is technically mo naman ang unit cost. So kana mo na imuhang i-compare. Same would apply if you are to accept or reject a special product and either to keep or drop a product or service. So in anak ka importante ang imuhang unit cost or unit product cost. So again, ayaw mo ka-confuse ha. Unit cost can also refer to as your unit product cost. So ano siya? Now, your unit cost information. So unit cost, as mentioned ganiha, may be pakuha nimo siya or imuhang ma-measure is either actual or estimated nga cost ang imuhang gamiton, di ba? So it's either you will use, or unit cost may use the actual costing na measurement system, which is ang gamiton nimo is ang actual direct materials, actual direct labor, actual nga overhead cost. So meaning mo na siya tanan ang imuhang basis to get the unit cost. Or another way is if you make use of your normal costing. Now in normal costing, ang iyahang difference is that it is a combination of actual and the usage of predetermined rates. So naakay actual cost, which is for your direct materials and direct labor, and your overhead is assigned at predetermined rates. So diri na ni ang kaning overhead is diri na to ma-apply ang mga estimation kay tungod dagamit ra kag predetermined rate. Now why do we do that, or why is there a difference between normal o costing, normal and actual? Ganun dili naman ang actual tanan. Now in reality, ang imuhang direct labor o direct materials, dali ra kay siya kuhaan actual cost, kay of course ma-determine man dayon nimo, di ba? Like for example, inipalit nimo raw materials, naaman dayon kay cost sa imuhang raw materials, di ba? Na dinay nakakot kung pila na ang price sa imuhang gipalit dinha. Same would apply for direct labor, kay tungod kabaw ka pila ka buok ang laborers nimo nga the laborers that are directly attributable sa imuhang product, o kabaw ka kung pila ilang rate, di ba? Like fix ilang rate. For example, minimum wage baro na sila. So for example, minimum wage 10 ra kabuk imuhang workers nga nag-work on your manufacturing. So kabaw ka every month per se is kabaw ka kung pila na gyud ang actual direct materials o direct labor nga ma-incur nimo. Now, arita sa overhead. Overhead costs are indirect costs. So, dili dyan nimo siya ma-determine, di ba? Kung asa siya ibutang na. For example, ana is your utilities. Di ba? Ang imuhang utilities, let's say for example, electricity, ang iyahang actual cost kay mahibaw-an na nimo the next month na, di ba? Di ba kung makakadawat kag bill sa VECO, ika next month na biya siya bill, imuhang bill sa March is madawat na nimo April. So meaning dili na timely ang imuhang information nga magamit. So for example, katong cost, kung kwaon nimo ang total cost nga na-incur nimo for the month of March, let's say total product cost nimo nga na-incur for March, mahulog nga incomplete pa siya kay tungod wala pa man nimo makuha ang actual cost sa katong mga related sa iyang overhead. Diba, wala pa kabaw pila ang imong tubig, pilang imong electricity, diba? So kana siya dili timely na ang makuha nimo nga information. So meaning kung mag-agad, instead of dapat gamiton nimo ang cost on the month of March, is ang mahitabo imo na kunuhay siyang pa-April na lang. So di na timely and relevant ang imong information. Therefore, what the company would do is mag-estimate na sila sa month of March. So, dili na mo come in ang imuhang predetermined na rates. So, mo na siya reason nga nung ang normal costing, ang kasagaran nga gamiton gyud as basis or measurement sa pagkuha nimo sa imuhang unit cost. So, in order for you to get your predetermined rates, kaning predetermined rate nimo is naapod ni sa inyuhang cost accounting, di ba? So, that is your budgeted cost divided by your estimated activity usage. So, ang kanimuhang denominator is mag-vary na ni siya kung unsa ang imuhang cost driver. So, ara na siya sa inyong cost accounting is ang imuhang ni siyang cost driver kung pila ang activity usage sa imuhang cost driver. So it can be your direct labor hours, it can be your machine hours. So kana maglahi-lahi na siya depende sa kung unsa nga overhead ang iyang, kung unsa nga specific overhead cost ang iyang gibuhat, di ba? So for example, let's say electricity, ato ang budgeted cost is let's say 100,000. Now, ang ato ang cost driver is pwede man nga pila ang number of hours nga nag-on ang imuhang electricity, di ba? Let's say 8 hours. 8 hours times 30 in a month. So, mo na imuhang estimated na activity usage, di ba? Or imo pag siyang mo na siya imuhang i-apply sa imuhang product baron, di ba? Kay per day ang imuhang i-allocate niya nga cost sa electricity. So, yun na, it would depend on the cost driver. Basta, the focus here is there is a combination already of the actual cost and the estimation. So, more na siya ang kuan, ay muhang hinumduman yun diri na part. So, that is your what do you call that? Objective number 1, which is about unit cost or the importance of unit cost. Now, let's move on to our second objective, which is to describe the functional-based costing approaches. Now, how are functional-based costs assigned? So, it can be either, or there are two ways. First is the direct materials and direct labor are assigned by direct tracing. If maka-remember mo, Now, if maka-remember mo, di ba, discuss na ni sa, I think it's also chapter 2, katong cost assignment. So, we have direct tracing. Or kato, matrace na yun mo sa kung sa nga product ang iyahang gi-applyan, di ba? While your overhead is assigned by driver, this should be tracing, sorry, the driver tracing and allocation nga method. So, muna siya ang sa imuhang functional base. So, technically, mura siya katong normal costings katong to previously bago ay lang agi discuss, no? So, again, ang direct materials o direct labor nimo kay ma-identify dayon nimo kung asa siya or ma-trace dayon nimo kung asa siya nga product, di ba, na unsa nga product ang ihang gi-allocatean or unsa nga product ang pila ka raw materials ang nagamit sa specific nga product and so on and so forth. Now, sa overhead is diri na katong sa mag-allocation na ka or magamit na kag drivers or katong cost drivers. So, manang driver tracing and the allocation nga method. Now, in functional-based costing, it makes use of unit level activity drivers. So, the unit level activity drivers are used to assign overhead costs to the products. Now, these are, when you say unit level activity drivers, these are factors that cause changes in cost as the units produce change. So again, ang units nag-agad siya sa imuhang change in units produced. Manang unit level ng activity driver siya. Now, the use of only unit-based drivers to assign overhead costs to products assume that the overhead consumed by products is highly correlated with the number of units produced. Now, for those overhead costs for which this assumption is valid, the unit-based assignment corresponds to driver tracing. And then for those overhead costs that violate the assumption, the cost assignment is an allocation. So, di ba, again, ako i-repeat ha, di ba diri ganiha overhead is either driver tracing or allocation. Now, mugamit ka og driver tracing if your overhead cost is highly correlated or highly nga nag-agad siya sa imuhang number of units produced. Now, if wala siya mag-agad sa imuhang number of units produced, ang gamiton nimo nga cost assignment is ang allocation nga method. Now, used to assign manufacturing overhead either by units produced, direct labor hours, direct labor dollars, machine hours, direct material dollars. So these are examples kanisha. These are examples of unit level drivers. Again, kanisha is nag-agad siya ha. Nag-agad siya sa number of units produced. So kung pila ka book number of units. So after the organization or after you've already chosen a unit level driver, the next step is to determine the activity capacity that the driver measures. Now, although any reasonable capacity level could be chosen, there are 4 usual candidates or ang imong tawag nga mga capacity levels. So, there are 4. First is your expected activity capacity, which refers to the activity output the firm expects to attain for the coming year. So, muna yung mga expected capacity. Next capacity level is your normal activity capacity, which refers to the activity capacity which refers to the average activity output that a firm experiences in the long term or over the long term. Now, in this case, your normal volume is computed over more than one period. Now, next is your theoretical activity capacity. So, in this capacity level, it refers to the absolute maximum output that can be realized assuming everything operates perfectly. So again, ang imuhang theoretical is absolute siya. Oops. absolute maximum na output under perfect setting or perfect world. Now, the last capacity level is your practical capacity level, which is the maximum that can be achieved or maximum output. However, yung difference sa imong theoretical is kani siya is can be achieved under efficient operations. This one is in a perfect condition. Practical is efficient operation. So, lahi na siya. Dili pasabot nga efficient siya kay perfect na siya. So kana man ang imong tulo ka capacity levels. Now, of these 4 levels, the last 3, which is your normal, theoretical, and your practical activity capacity, share the advantage of using the same activity level period after period. So, as a result, they each produce less period-to-period fluctuations, they each produce less period-to-period fluctuations of the per unit overhead cost than a rate based on expected actual capacity, which kani ang nasa imong expected activity capacity. So, using practical or theoretical capacity is often recommended because it avoids assigning unused capacity cost to products and encourages management of the excess capacity. So those are your 4 capacity levels. Now let's have a brief example. You have here your overhead, your 160,000, your expected activity in direct labor hours, that is the DLH, of 100,000, your actual activity of also 100,000 hours, and then your actual overhead of 380,000. Now again, under functional base is kwaon nimo daan ang iyahang unit cost, diba? So diri is magkuha ta sa ato ang predetermined overhead rate. Now ato ang gamiton diri nga activity usage or our cost driver is of course ang ato ang expected activity, which is 100,000. So that is your budgeted cost, your 360, and then your expected activity, which is 100. So you have a predetermined overhead of 3.6. Now your applied overhead is your overhead rate multiplied by your actual activity nga 100,000. So in this case, it is 360,000. Now, as you can see, your applied overhead is different kaysa sa imong actual overhead nga 380,000. Now, the difference between your actual overhead and your applied overhead is what you call your overhead variance. So, still, kanang overhead variance is ma-discuss pod na sa inyuhang cost accounting. So, di ba, sumpay ra og tinai ang inyuhang mass ug ang inyuhang managerial accounting ug inyuhang cost accounting. So, again, the difference of your actual and applied overhead is your overhead variance. Now, in your overhead variance, it can be either under-applied or over-applied. So, when it is under-applied, you should add the variance to your cost of goods sold. Now, if it is over-applied, you should subtract it from your cost of goods sold. So, in this case, 360,000, your applied overhead is lesser than your actual, which is 380. So, meaning, ang hitabo sa imuha is under-applied. Under-applied ka by 20,000. Diba? Kaya may difference niyan. 20,000. So, kaning 20,000 is imo ni siyang i-add sa imuhang cost of goods sold kay para ma-achieve ninimo ang actual overhead nga 380,000. Now, if balipod ni siya, for example lang, kani imong applied is 380, then your actual is 360. So of course, ang 380 is imong kuhaan og 20,000. So subtracted ba imong kuhaan og 20,000 kay of course your actual cost or actual overhead is just 360,000. So mag adjust na kaani if na kay amount sa imuhang in practice, di ba? Mag-adjust na kaani sa imuhang overhead if na kay actual cost sa imuhang overhead, di ba? So like balik ka tong electricity bill nga example, for the month of March is na kay estimation or na kay applied overhead in relation to your electricity bill. Now, we can next month, for the month of April, diha na ka mag-adjusting entries if na kay makuha nga kung pila to imong actual nga bill gyud. Kaya again, there in balik ta sa itong financial, di ba? Sa financial, bayagya po nimo kay historical cost, bayagyad ka mag-base, di ba? Halabi kay estimations when it comes to your inventory. So, kana siya. Imo gigapon na siyang i-adjust to properly reflect kung pila gito ang actual cost nga na-incur sa business. So, muna siya ang concept of the overhead variance. Now, in this case is isa lang ang ato ang nakitaan, no, or isa ra ka rate ang ato ang apply, but in reality kani siya is plant-wide na rate ni siya. Yan. This is a plant-wide na rate. Now, there can also be instances nga pwede ang entity is departmental ang iyahang kwaon nga rate, diba? Per department ka nagbuhat o product. So, kana siya, for example, assembly department, finishing department, or packing department. So, kana siya, kada department is na ay lahi-lahi nga rate na gamiton. So, when you say plant-wide, is kani siya, parehas tanang department nga gamiton nga overhead rate. So, kana, pwede siya plant-wide or pwede siya departmental na rate. Now, next objective na ta, which is to tell why functional-based costing approaches may produce distorted costs. Now again, the plant-wide and the departmental rates are used sa imong functional-based costing. Now, functional-based costing can cause distortions sa imong cost. So, there are many symptoms of distorted costs, such as profit margins that are difficult to explain. Diba? Another symptom is that the outcomes of bids are difficult to explain as well. When your competitors' prices appear unrealistically low, the products are difficult to produce, show high profits, wherein operational managers want to drop products that appear profitable. The company has a highly profitable niche all to itself. When customers do not complain about product increases. So, kanisya, these are mga distortions, di ba? Mahibong ka. Ganun nahitabo man ni siya nga mga butang. Like, for example, customers do not complain about price increases. Nga naman, di ba? Because usually, di ba, customers are really sensitive to prices. So, why is it nga, based na atong nakuha is, dili naman sensitive ang customer or di mo question, di ba, if na price increase, mamalit lang yapon sila, di ba, inana. So, these are some of the examples nga naka-cause og distortion sa costing sa entity. So, organizations that have experienced some, if not all, of these symptoms have found that their plant-wide or departmental rates are simply no longer capable of accurately assigning overhead costs to individual products. Thus, their products can either be it's either ang cost niya is gamay ra kaayo, or ang iyahang cost is taas na kaayo, diba? So, again, distorted na ang iyahang cost. Tungod kay, again, your measurement or your way of assigning, which is ang kanang sa functional base, is dili na siya accurate. So, There are at least two major factors that impair the ability of your unit-based, plant-wide, and departmental rates to assign overhead costs accurately. First is the proportion of non-unit related overhead costs to total overhead costs is large. And then second is the degree of product diversity is great. So, first is arita sa atuang non-unit related na overhead cost. So, when a unit level approach is used to assign non-unit level cost overhead, cost information can be distorted. So, under non-unit level activity driver, so, say pasabot anang non-unit level. Katong ganiha is unit level man siya, katong if makaremember sa unit level is mag-agad siya sa imuhang number of units produced, di ba? Activity driver is mag-agad siya sa imuhang number of units produced. Now, not all na mga activities kay mag-agad sa number of units produced or dili applicable na ato siya i-base sa number of units produced. That is why natin gitawag na non-unit level na activity driver. Let's say for example, maghatatag example, let's have the setup cost, di ba? Or setup cost sa imuhang mga equipment, di ba? Ang imuhang setup cost kung magbuhat kag product is mag-setup para baya ka kay what you call that? Kaisa ra ka mag-setup. So, dili siya proper if ang setup cost nimo is ang iyahang, if ang total setup cost nimo is ang iyahang divisor, di ba? Is ang imuhang number of units produced. Kaya man, di man directly mo correlate ang imuhang setup cost sa imuhang number of units produced. Asa man siya mas mo correlate? Mas mo correlate siya more sa number of setups nga imuhang gibuhat sa kana nga period, di ba? Kagets? I hope nakagets Ramono. So, ang imuhang setup cost is dili siya mag-agad again sa number of units produced, but rather mas ari siya na ay effect or mas mo relate siya sa kung pila ka book number of setups ang imuhang gibuhat anha nga period. Kay ang number of setups man ang mo determine kung pila imuhang total number of total setup cost, di ba? So, ina na siya, ang ihang cost driver is instead of the number of units, ihang cost driver is number of setups na. So, meaning non-unit level siya. So, even if the number of unit produced, number of units of the products produced will change, is dili siya mo affect sa imuhang determined overhead rate when it comes to your setup cost nga overhead. So, ana siya. So, when you say non-unit level, these are factors that measure the consumption of non-unit level activities by product and can distort your product cost. So, basically, mo to siya kung gichika, guys. Again, ang inyo rin yung hinamduman ani is these refer to activities na dili magagad sa imuhang or dili proper na mag-agad sila sa imuhang number of units produced. Mao nang dili sila unit level na activity. Mao gina siya diri ang gipasabot sa imuhang non-unit level activity or non-unit related na overhead cost. Now, another thing is we have product diversity. So, this is when products consume overhead activities in systematically different proportions. Now, systematically different proportions because, again, your product is diverse. So, your product may have different sizes, not different product sizes. Your product may have different complexity, like lahi-lahi ang setup time, lahi-lahi ang size kada batch sa imuhang product, di ba? So, dili ra ka magbuhat og same product all over again and again and again. Like, kung same product ka again and again, wala na kay i-change, di ba? But however, marag fixed ra, mahulog marag, dili, don't confuse with fixed cost haba. Mahulog nga, dili ka magsigig ilis-ilis og rate ba kung dili diverse ang imuhang product. Now, if diverse ang imuhang product, of course, di ba, kung mas dako ni siya nga size nga kani siya nga batch of product, mas daghang number of products na involved sa kani nga batch, of course lahi siya cost in comparison sa katong batch nga mas gamay ang number of products consumed. So mo na siya nga ang product diversity is maka-cause siya og distortions sa imuhang cost. Tungod kay again, nasa different nga mga proportions, and then which would translate nga lahi-lahi ang imuhang i-assign nga cost ana niya, or maglahi, dili fixed or dili constant ang cost nga ma-apply ana nga specific nga product. So, ano siya, especially if your product is na siya lahi-lahi nga variants. Diba? For example, sa nina, lahi, nabiya kay small, medium, large, extra large, diba? So, di ba ya parehas kag cost nga i-assign sa small, sa medium, sa large, diba? Nabiya sa lahi-lahi o cost. Kay example, magkadaghan ba ang tela nga imuhang gamiton sa magkadako ang size, diba? So, kana palang daan, makita na nimo nga dili jud fixed or dili jud constant ang imuhang ma-apply nga cost for that specific nga product. So, kana siya maka-cause siya mga distortions. So, that is it about your, functional base. Now, let's move on to our fourth objective, which is to explain how an activity-based costing system works for product costing. So, ganiha, ato atong ipang-mention ang functional base ug unsay mga disadvantages, diba? Now, arita next sa activity base. So, ganiha sa ato ang functional base is there were two main stages. First is we assign overhead cost to the organizational units, either to plant-wide or departmental-wide. So, mo ito nagamit ang predetermined overhead rates. And then, second stage is ang overhead rates is gi-assign dayon siya sa imuhang products, diba, mga katuhang gibuhat. So, diha to mo kami ng katong mga distortions. Now, under activity-based, sa activity-based costing is that it makes use of a key set of interview questions and record the answers, which ato ang maibawaan later on. Now, there is activity-based costing. It first traces cost to activities and then to products. Meaning, in activity-based costing, there is an underlying assumption that activities consume resources and that products in turn consume activities. I hope nakagets ra. So, lahi siya sa imuhang functional, no? So, sa functional nimo, is si cost nimo is gi-assign dayon siya nimo diretso sa imuhang product. Again, si functional nimo is imuhang cost is gi-assign dayon siya nimo directly sa imuhang product. So, meaning, ang katong resources nimo is na-assign dayon siya diretso sa imuhang product. Under activity-based costing, kay si specific activity pa ang mo consume sa imuhang resource, and then si product mo consume siya og activity. So, with that, the basic activity-based costing model is also a two-stage process. So, in ABC costing system, it emphasizes direct tracing and driver tracing, while your functional-based costing system tends to be allocation intensive. So, arita sa ato ang mga key set of questions. So, mo niya itong mga key set of questions. So, again, these are interview questions can be used to identify activities and activity attributes needed for costing purposes. Now, the information derived from these questions serves as the basis for constructing an activity dictionary, as well as providing data helpful for assigning resource costs to individual activities. Now, when we say activity dictionary, ang ipasabutan na niya is the list of the activities in an organization along with some critical activity attributes. Now, when we say activity attributes, this refers to financial and non-financial information items that describe individual activities. So, manang pasabot sa activity dictionary o activity attributes. So, let's start with the first question. With the question, how many employees are in your department? So, with this question, can assume that the activity consumes labor. Diba? Kaya naman, ang ipangutan naman niya is ang imuhang number of employees. So, it correlates to your labor nga labor resource. Anang mo na diri ang gi-mention or gi-refer sa imong first nga question. Now, second question, what do they do? So, meaning, ang activities diri, nagipasabot, activities are the people doing things for other people or sa mga functions sa imuhang mga laborers, di ba? Next question, do customers outside your department use any equipment? So, in here, activities can also refer to equipment doing work for other people. Ari sa second question is people doing work for others. So, meaning manual labor doing work for other people. In this case, this can refer to your customers doing work or not necessarily work, but your equipment rather doing work for other people, which in this case is your customer. So, kana siya. Pwede po na siya nga activity. Next question, what resource are used by each activity? So, in this case, activities consume resources in addition to labor. So, aside from manual labor, diri na mo come in ang katong imuhang mga equipment, machinery, supplies, diba? What other resources are used by each activity? So, this about is nag-identify naman ka sa imuhang mga labor resources. In this case, nag-identify na ka sa imuhang mga other resources aside from labor. So, ano siya? Kaning duha is activity identification na ni siya duha nga question. Kaning fourth question is resource identification na siya. Next question is what are the outputs of each activity? So in this question, di ba, nangutanan na siya sa imuhang outputs, meaning this question helps identify your activity drivers. Again, this question helps identify your activity drivers. So, ang answer ani is mo ni siya imong mga possible nga mga activity drivers. The next question, who or what uses the activity output? Now, this question identifies your cost object. So, it can either be the product, other activities, or your customers. So, kuming kag who uses the activity output, pada man nga your customers did it. So, if ang imong gibuhat is final product na, or pwede nga ang kana siya nga output nimo sa kana nga activity is magamit siya sa lain nga activity pagyud. So, for example, ang output sa imuhang assembly department is pwede gamit mahimo siyang input sa imuhang finishing department. So, ina na siya ba? So, maka-identify na ka sa imuhang cost object. And then the last question is, how much time do workers spend on each activity? And then is it buy equipment? So in this case is ang makuha nimo nga information is in relation na to the assignment or the assignment of your cost of labor and the equipment to your activities. So, okay, how much time naman ang spend nila? So, for example, kani nga machinery is magamit ni siya sa mga workers for 4 hours. So, meaning, 4 hours ra po ang imuhang ma-allocate ana niya nga time, di ba? Kaya ito, maura man ang number of time nga gigamit siya sa imuhang mga laborers. So, ina na siya. So, in this case, you are already identifying your resource drivers. So, these are your key questions. So, muna ang imuhang pwede ipangutana. Diba? If ever you are to identify kung nag-identify ba siya activity, is it identifying a potential cost driver? Is it identifying a potential resource driver? Is it identifying a potential cost object? Diba? Or is it simply stating a resource? Diba? Is it simply identifying a resource, kind of resource? So, kana siya ang mga ma-answer ani nga mga key questions. So, maglahi-lahi siya. So, I hope you get those things. More examples are found in your ebook. Now, when you say cost driver, or katong sa pinakalasan nga question, diba? It talks about identifying resource drivers. So, this refers to factors that measure the consumption of resources by your activities. So, mo na siya ang resource driver. Now, how do you assign activity costs? Now, activity costs are assigned to products on the basis of usage. So, mo nang kasagaran if mabantayan ninyo, nga kasagaran sa mga costs is either direct labor hours, machine hours, diba? Kada yung it talks about the usage yun. So, kung pila na siya ka-hours gigamit sa laborers, kung pila ka-hours nag-on ang kana nga machinery, pila ka-hours ang i-consume sa setup time, and so on and so forth. So, more on sa activity base is more on the time yun nga gigamit siya. Diba? So, muna siya ang activity base. So, unlike sa katong imuhang functional base, diba? Nga more on base siya sa number of units produced, there is activity-based costing is more on the basis of usage. So, kung unsa gid gayon nimo gigamit ang kana specific resource. So, mo na basis sa imuhang computations, imuhang mga rates, imuhang overhead rates. Now, let's talk about the classification of activities. Now, for product costing purposes, activities can be assigned or can be classified into 4 general activity categories, which is a unit level, batch level, product level, and facility level. Now, let's start with the unit level. When we say unit level, of course, by the name itself, this pertains to those activities that are performed each time a unit is produced. So, for example, machining and assembly activities performed each time a unit is produced. So, the cost of unit level activities vary with the number of units produced. So, kani siya is pare-pareha siya ato sa katong mga functional, di ba? Mo to siya imong unit level activity drivers. So, magbase siya sa imuhang iyahang cost driver is ang imuhang number of units produced tungod kay magbase man siya sa number of units produced, di ba? Or highly attributable man siya sa number of units produced. So, man ang mga machining activities o mga assembly activities. Now, when we talk about batch level activities are those performed each time a batch of goods is produced. So kani is dili na siya per unit nga produce kundi per batch na siya. Now the cost of batch level activities vary with the number of batches, but they are fixed with respect to the number of units in each batch. So examples of which include setup costs, inspection costs, unless ang inspection is per unit, but if ang inspection kay per batch, so batch level siya. Same would apply for product scheduling and material handling. So these are all examples of your batch level activities. Now the next level is your product level. Oops. So product level activities are those performed as needed to support the various products produced by a company. So these activities consume inputs that develop products or allow products to be produced and sold. So these activities and their costs tend to increase as the number of different products increases. So examples of which include engineering changes, development of product testing procedures, marketing a product, process engineering, and so on and so forth. So those are product level mga costs. And then when we talk about facility level na mga costs, these are costs that are obtained to sustain a factory's general manufacturing processes. So these activities involve activities that benefit the organization at some level but do not provide a benefit for any specific nga product. So facility level man siya, meaning as a whole ang iyang effect sa imuhang mga products, diba? So it includes plant management, landscaping, support of community programs, security, property taxes, plant depreciation. So kana siya mga examples sa imuhang facility level. So meaning dili nimo siya ma-directly attribute sa imuhang specific na product. Now if makabantay mo of these 4 levels, your first 3, which is your unit level, batch level, and your product level all contain product-related na activities. Meaning, in these 3 levels, it is possible to measure the demands placed on the activities by the individual products. And then activities within these 3 levels can further be subdivided on the basis of your consumption levels. However, on your fourth level, kaning facility level, this is where the problem comes in for ABC. Kay sa ABC manggod, dili man nimo siya ma-trace diretso sa product. Sa facility level is dili man gud siya activity based, diba? Kay again, dili man nimo siya ma-pinpoint to a specific product since ang iyang effect is for the whole facility man. So mo ni siya ang nag-pose og problem for the ABC nga philosophy. So tracing these activity to individual products are very hard to do. That is why facility level activities are usually treated as period cost under ABC costing. So again, a pure ABC system does not assign the cost of the facility level activities to the products. So these costs would be treated as your period cost. Or ato na siya mo come in ka na sa imuhang mga fixed costs, diba? So ang kay balik na ta, di man siya nimo specifically pinpoint to a specific product. So mo na i-treat siya as a period cost, then kaning other 3 is treated as part of your product cost. So kana siya. Now let's move on to our very last objective, which is to explain how the number of activity rates can be reduced. Now, why do you need to reduce the activity rates, diba? You can remember, si activity-based costing is what usually happens is you compute a rate or you calculate a rate for each activity. So, si kada activity, lahi-lahi siya og rate. Now, what would happen if your organization has a lot of activities? Diba? Kada product, daghan siya different steps. Diba? Daghan siya different departments nga gian. No? Kada department is nga po siya lahi-lahi nga mga activity rates. Diba? For isa ra naka-product. Now, imagine if the company produces different products. So, dubli-dubli, mag-dubli-dubli. As in, daghan siya kayo kag rates nga kailangan i-compute. So, that is one of the disadvantages sa imong activity-based nga cost system. Because again, since you are to, as much as possible, have different rates or calculate different activity rates, meaning, mahimo siyang mas complicated or mas complex siya. It can be time-consuming. So, muna siya ang disadvantage ng activity-based. That is why organizations are doing ways in order for them to reduce these rates. Muna siya, nani siya reducing size and complexity of the rates. So, you can either reduce the size of the rates by either first, one method is to group all activities with the same consumption ratios into one cost pool. So, same siya o consumption ratios. So, if kanin siya nga specific activity, if ang iyahang consumption is, let's say, 40% or 0.4, then tanang mga katong mga 0.4 is kuyog sila tanan. Ina na siya ba? Tanang mga 0.6 nga mga ang ihang consumption rate o is idungan siya tanan. So bali dili na siya tagsaon bitaw. I-group na to ang katong mga mag-group nimo. So pero sa na mga instances, di ba nga let's say there are different products nga nagamit ana nga department, or there are a lot of departments nga moag are not departments, there are a lot of products nga moagian nga department, diba? And then kana siya nga department is maura ginahang level of products nga mahuman in a specific day, product A, B, C, or D pana siya. Basta every day kana nga iyang mabuhat is, let's say 20% ra gyud ang iyang ma-consume per day, diba? Iyang consumption ratio, whatever product it is. So, meaning kanin si product A, B, C, ug D is pwede ninyo siya mag-group into one. Ang rate niya is same na tanan. So, ina na siya. I-grouping na nimo siya into a one cost pool. Second technique is, or second method is by approximating your ABC. So, this is when you are only to use only the most expensive activities and their drivers to assign cost to their products, and then the cost of the less expensive activities are allocated to the cost pools of the selected expensive activities. So in this way, most costs are assigned to the products accurately. Now, the cost of the most expensive activities are assigned using the appropriate cost and effect drivers, while the costs of the less expensive activities are assigned somewhat arbitrarily. This approach is simple and easy to understand and often leads to a good approximation of the ABC assignments. So in this case is naa kay priority. Yun na siya. Ang katong mga material cost mo imuhang tarungon og assign. Na siya. Mo imuhang tarungon og assign. Now, ang uban is mo na to siya ang imuhang i-group. So, ina na siya. Mo na siya. Approximation of your activity-based costing. So, again, kani siya is ma-reduce na lang mga rates na apply, diba? And then, lastly is kanina brief comparison of your functional-based costing and your activity-based. So, functional-based overhead uses only unit-based activity drivers. So, as I mentioned before, mag-agad siya sa imong number of units produced. Then, split overheads into fixed and variable and allocates overhead based on the appropriate unit level rate. Now, on the activity-based system, is it improves product costing by first looking at cause and effect, and then second, recognizing that some fixed overhead varies in proportion to changes other than your production volume. So, nag-involve na atong mga non-unit levels. So, katulad mga different nga cost drivers. So, that ends chapter 4. So, if you have any questions, feel free to chat in the group chat.